Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to revisit a case that once outraged, divided, and forced America to ask an unsettling question. Can wealth grant someone immunity from wrongdoing? This is the story of Ethan Couch, a 16-year-old boy raised in an affluent family in Texas, who took the lives of 4 people in one drunken night. But what shocked the public even more was not just the tragedy itself. It was how the Couch family wielded their money, their influence, and a defense no one had ever heard of before. Affluenza, the syndrome of being so wealthy that you cannot comprehend the consequences of your actions. Over the next 20 minutes, I'll walk you step by step through the rise and fall, from the fateful crash, the notorious legal strategy, the controversial sentence, to the flight to Mexico, and the lingering scars that have haunted everyone involved for more than a decade. If this is your first time visiting the channel, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the most haunting, true stories about crime and justice. Family and background: Ethan Couch was born in 1997 in Burleson, a small city in the state of Texas, USA. He was the only son of Fred Couch, a wealthy businessman who owned a multi-million-dollar precast concrete company. The Couch family lived in a sprawling mansion with a garage full of luxury cars and a meticulously manicured private garden. In the eyes of the neighbors, they were the epitome of the upper class, wealthy, privileged, and practically untouchable. Ethan's mother, Tanya Couch, never had to worry about making a living. She spent most of her time supervising household staff and organizing an effortless, comfortable life for her son. From a very young age, Ethan was thoroughly spoiled. If he wanted something, it appeared immediately. If he did something wrong, someone else would take care of it on the family's behalf. According to his elementary school teachers, Ethan rarely respected classroom discipline. As he grew older, he started to display defiance, stubbornness, and a habit of blaming others. In his teenage years, Ethan frequently skipped school to hang out with friends, driving his pickup truck through the town's narrow streets at high speed, blasting loud music and yelling. More than once, neighbors had to call the police because he was causing disturbances late at night. But every time, Ethan's parents would show up with an air of superiority, quickly paying fines and smoothing things over. Every problem seemed to disappear after just one phone call from the Couch family. Many people believed that this style of upbringing planted the seeds of tragedy. One psychologist once said that Ethan was raised in a lawless environment where there were no real consequences for wrongdoing. By the time he was 15, Ethan's name already appeared in police records for numerous infractions: underage drinking, reckless driving, vandalism. Yet, strangely, he had never faced any serious punishment or any intervention that actually worked. In Burleson, no one dared to say it out loud, but everyone thought the same thing. With Ethan Couch, it was only a matter of time before everything spiraled out of control. The fateful night. On the evening of June 15th, 2013, Ethan Couch was only 16 years old, but he was already accustomed to partying. That day, he and 7 friends gathered at his family's sprawling house. Beer, vodka, and even sedatives were spread out across the table. No one stopped them or showed any concern. To Ethan, that night was just another familiar celebration, a chance to prove he was invincible. Around 11 p.m., Ethan decided to drive off in a red Ford F-350. This massive truck belonged to his father's company. He climbed into the cab with a look of confidence, even though the alcohol was already blurring his vision. Later, tests showed Ethan's blood alcohol concentration was 3 times the legal limit for an adult, and he also tested positive for Valium, a prescription drug known to cause drowsiness and slow reaction time. He sped down a dark two-lane road in Burleson at over 100 kilometers per hour. It was usually a quiet stretch, but that night, 4 people were on the roadside struggling to help a stranded SUV. A mother and her teenage daughter, a local pastor, and a kind mechanic who had stopped to assist. They had hazard lights flashing and reflective warning signs in place, but to Ethan, all those signals disappeared in his drunken haze. The Ford F-350 barreled forward without slowing. In a brief instant, the headlights illuminated the group. There was no sound of brakes, no chance to run. The violent impact crushed the back of the SUV and threw the victims meters away. Everything happened in seconds. One witness later said, "I heard metal shattering and screams, and then silence. When rescue crews arrived, they found a scene like something from a disaster movie. Mangled vehicles, broken glass scattered across the road, and bodies lying motionless. 4 people had died instantly. 2 boys riding in the back of Ethan's truck were seriously injured, one suffering spinal trauma that left him permanently paralyzed. Police recorded Ethan stepping out of the cab with glazed eyes, reeking of alcohol. He could barely comprehend what had just happened. In that moment, a teenager's night of partying had become an irreversible tragedy for several innocent families. The beginning of the outrage. The morning after the crash, as news spread across Burleson, the community was overwhelmed by shock and anger. In the newspapers, the faces of the 4 victims were displayed prominently: a devoted mother, her teenage daughter, a pastor respected by the entire town, and the mechanic who had stopped to help that night. In just a few brief seconds, they were all gone. Police quickly completed their case files. Ethan Couch was charged with intoxication manslaughter, along with possession of alcohol and controlled substances. If convicted to the maximum extent, Ethan could face up to 20 years in prison for each life lost, adding up to 80 years in total. Prosecutors believe this would be their chance to show that youth and wealth were not shields against justice. In their first press conference, they pledged to pursue the heaviest sentence possible, to send a message to any teenager who thought the law did not apply to them. But Ethan was not just any teenager. He was the son of Fred Couch, a man local attorneys described as well-connected and wealthy enough to hire a legal team determined to protect his interests at any cost. The Couch family swiftly retained a group of high-profile defense lawyers experienced in handling cases that drew intense media scrutiny. At the same time, they brought in a forensic psychologist, Dr. Dick Miller, to prepare their defense argument. For weeks, the legal team worked tirelessly on the case. They gathered testimony, examined every factor related to Ethan's age, psychological history, and family background. The entire community braced for a tense trial filled with fierce debate. In December 2010, during the sentencing hearing, Dick Miller stood before the court and introduced a concept never before cited in the history of Texas criminal proceedings. He called it Affluenza. In a lengthy explanation lasting hours, Miller claimed that Ethan was the product of pathological wealth. He had grown up with parents who indulged him completely, never teaching him boundaries between right and wrong, never requiring him to face consequences. According to Miller, Ethan lacked the capacity to understand the results of his actions because he had no moral foundation. On live television, this defense instantly caused a public uproar. Many called it an insult to justice and to the families who had lost their loved ones. While prosecutors argued that Ethan was an aware teenager who had deliberately chosen to drink, deliberately chosen to drive, and consciously ignored the risks, the defense insisted Ethan had never been taught to understand responsibility. Another factor that enraged the public was the trial process itself. Because Ethan was only 16, the case fell under the jurisdiction of the Texas juvenile court system, where no jury would be seated. All the power to decide the sentence rested solely with Judge Gene Boyd. The entire town of Burleson watched the outcome with a sense of dread. They knew that with just one lenient decision, Ethan Couch could walk free, despite 4 lives ending beneath his truck. And for many, that was something even harder to accept than the crime itself. The flight to Mexico, nearly 2 years after the controversial verdict, Ethan Couch still seemed to have learned nothing from the crash that had taken 4 lives. His days continued to revolve around hanging out with friends, driving large trucks, and partying with alcohol. The 10-year probation and treatment program that the judge had hoped would rehabilitate Ethan had become a joke to him. A teenager who had grown up spoiled and convinced he was immune to consequences. On December 2nd, 2015, a short video surfaced on social media. In it, Ethan was holding up a beer can at a crowded party. People were laughing, cheering, and Ethan himself appeared completely unconcerned about being caught. But to authorities, it was a blatant violation of his probation terms. Absolutely no alcohol or drugs, or his suspended sentence would be revoked and the case transferred to adult court. Prosecutors immediately filed for an emergency arrest warrant. When police arrived at Ethan's house, they discovered that he and his mother, Tanya Couch, had vanished without a trace. The bedroom was empty, phones were left behind, and bank accounts had suddenly gone inactive. Investigators determined that mother and son had planned their escape in advance. For days, American media reported nonstop on the manhunt for the Affluenza teen. Many saw it as the ultimate proof. Ethan was not just irresponsible, he was determined to defy justice to the end. What they didn't know was that Finn and his mother had crossed the border, driving through Texas and into Mexico. They chose Puerto Vallarta, a famous resort city on the Pacific coast, as their hiding place. There, they rented a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, paid cash, used fake names, and kept contact with the outside world to a minimum. But a small oversight exposed them. During Christmas, Ethan wanted to order a pizza. He called from a new phone, believing it couldn't be traced. However, the FBI and Mexican authorities had been monitoring cell signals for weeks. That call to order pizza unwittingly gave away their final coordinates. On December 28, 2010, a Mexican tactical team suddenly raided the apartment. They found Ethan Couch with bleached blonde hair, wearing a simple t-shirt. He appeared calm, almost indifferent, as they handcuffed him. Tanya Couch was also arrested without resistance. In that moment, the arrogant escape ended more quietly than anyone had imagined. News of Ethan's arrest spread across America's evening broadcasts. Many people breathed a sigh of relief, feeling that finally, justice had caught up to privilege. The Couches were flown back to Texas under guard. Ethan was immediately booked into the adult jail in Tarrant County. For the first time in his life, he had to wear an orange prison uniform and sit behind bars like any other inmate. The media widely published Ethan's new mugshot, bleached hair, cold stare, as a symbol of the question, even now did he finally understand consequences? As for Tanya Couch, she was charged with hindering apprehension for helping her son flee. In the eyes of the public, the mother who had shielded Ethan at all costs could no longer avoid accountability. The flight to Mexico was not just a disgrace for the Couch family, it was the climax of America's outrage. For many, it proved that Ethan Couch, the affluenza teen, had never truly felt remorse, only the impulse to run from responsibility yet again. Finally paying the price? After being arrested in Mexico and extradited back to the U.S., Ethan Couch finally had to face what many believed he should have confronted long ago: real prison time. The Tarrant County Court quickly reviewed the entire case file. Prosecutors argued that Ethan's flight abroad was undeniable proof that probation had failed as a deterrent. In April 2016, the new judge on the case officially revoked Ethan's previous suspended sentence. Ethan Couch was sentenced to 720 days in jail, equivalent to 2 years, served in four separate 180-day terms, symbolizing the 4 lives lost under his truck. The courtroom was packed that day. Many of the victims' relatives had been waiting nearly 3 years for this moment. Some wept silently as the final sentence was read. The father of Brianna Mitchell, the young woman killed, told reporters, "I'm not celebrating, but at least finally Ethan has to pay some price." Ethan was taken straight to the Tarrant County Jail. There, he was no longer the privileged teenager whose last name, it's Towkin, had once worked like a protective charm. He was just another inmate assigned an identification number, wearing an orange jumpsuit, sleeping in a cell with dozens of other men. The American media covered every development closely. Many TV stations aired live footage of Ethan bowing his head in handcuffs. Some commentators called it a long overdue moment of justice, while others insisted that a 2-year sentence was far too light for the horrific consequences he'd caused. After completing his sentence in 20, Ethan Couch was released, but not fully free. The court imposed a long list of extremely strict probation conditions. He was required to wear an electronic monitoring bracelet 24/7, submit to random drug and alcohol tests, was prohibited from owning or operating any motor vehicle, and could not leave the county without prior permission. Prosecutors warned that if Ethan committed even a minor violation, he could be prosecuted and face many more years behind bars. One investigator said, "He's under closer supervision than any offender I've ever seen." Ethan's mother, Tanya Couch, was not spared from consequences either. She was charged with hindering apprehension for helping her son escape. Although she ultimately received probation rather than jail time, Tanya became a lightning rod for public condemnation. Many believed she had been the one who nurtured Ethan's lifelong sense of entitlement and arrogance. Even though Ethan served time and remains under monitoring, American public opinion is still deeply divided. In the eyes of millions, the lives of the 4 victims can never be compensated with any amount of money, nor softened by any defense invoking affluenza. Many editorials sounded a bitter warning. The Ethan Couch case was a stark reminder that the justice system does not always treat all social classes equally. In this society, sometimes money and influence can delay justice, though they cannot prevent it forever. And to this day, the name Ethan Couch remains a symbol of public outrage, a testament to how blind indulgence can sow a tragedy no one will ever be able to undo. More than a decade has passed, yet the Ethan Couch case is still mentioned whenever Americans discuss inequality in the justice system. In the years that followed, many U.S. states tightened laws around juvenile offenders to prevent another affluenza precedent. Today, Ethan lives a relatively quiet life, occasionally making headlines for minor violations. But his name has become a bitter reminder that justice is not always blind to power and wealth. If this story has made you reflect on responsibility, ethics, and fairness, leave a comment below. Do you think the court made the right decision, or should Ethan have paid a much heavier price? Don't forget to hit subscribe and share this video so more people can learn about true stories that are sometimes stranger than fiction. See you in the next video.